We're here today in Coffee County. We're discussing the pandemic influenza that occurred in 1918 with Mr. Garfield Johnson, who actually was a resident here in Coffee County during that time. Mr. Johnson, we appreciate so much you taking out the time to talk with us today about the influenza that occurred in 1918. I understand that you were actually living here in Coffee County at that time. Can you tell us a little bit about how old you were and who was affected in your family and what you remember about it?
My age was going on 5-year-old, and my dad had this influenza, and he lost conscience for 3 days and nights, and then lived. And then a brother of mine, a younger baby, got it, and lived, but affected his brain.
Do you recall the symptoms that you said your father had this influenza? Do you recall some of the symptoms that he had?
High fever, yes, ma'am.
And he was just very, very ill in general.
Well, he was more or less not able to move or you know, to get around, roll around even on the bed. He had a very serious a case of it, but there was no doctors then. There was a doctor in Brantley, and there was a doctor out at Bullock, and they went to the house, the doctor. And I can remember, but I can't remember which one it was. It come to my dad, but he gave him something, and he come out of it in about the fourth day. And it was awful out here the way it was. Everybody was scared of it, and they were scared to go help the folks that did have it, afraid they'd get it. And it was very contagious. And my mother had myself, an older girl, and a brother. And she was there. Back then, when we had, it was very crude what we had to live. We had to burn wood and go to the grist mill. And one thing and another, and the groceries got down to a very low place, and nobody could come out, would come in to make no arrangements for nothing. And finally, there was a first cousin of mine, a nephew of my dad's, come there and stayed with us about 2 weeks. And he got out and did sit his ass. And we made it in that way.
So you had your mother tried to see about everybody and take care of everybody, but they sort of ran out of supplies and things to do that with.
And nobody to go replenish nothing. And the grocers were getting down very low in the house, nothing, and nobody to get out but her and the woman. When you ain't got somebody with you when you've been having it, you miss them. They can't. And a woman, a lot of mama was the kind that weren't too good to, get out and do that.
Were neighbors able to help each other out during this time, or was the entire community too ill to even try to help each other?
I was told of complete families that died with it, and nobody to bear them. Nobody out there to bear them, and it was an awful thing.
That's very interesting. I've read that that they really couldn't even hold funerals and
no.
What do you recall? What did they?
More or less, somebody would get out there, and back then there was plenty of this old lumber around, and they'd build a box, then build a casket and cover it in cloth if they had that much, and put it in there and put it. I remember, I hope dig a lot of graves. They put them 6 feet under. 6 feet under.
You said that the doctors did come some, but you were telling me that they couldn't because
they had so many places to go to. And what they had back then was very crude to what people got today. And what they, he cleaned them like everything else. The doctor did. He cleaned them like everything else. I had little flu one time, and I didn't exactly go slam out of my head. And I remember we was using aspirin, and one of us was able to go, and my sister was giving me aspirin tablets. Well, old Dr. Watkins come in. Somebody got him to come there, and I told him, I said, Doctor, I want you to give me something for my head. I said, it hurts awful bad. He said, I give you something. I said, well, what was it? He said, aspirin. He went on and got on his car, and before he got that car cranked, I had my sister bringing me a glass of water and one of them aspirin, and it eased me off. Next morning, I was just about up ready to go. See, I hadn't stayed, that fever hadn't got me down, but that fever would carry you away. And I don't see how, today, my daddy lived to go 3 days and nights in a coma, but he did. He turned back out of it.
Well, he wasn't even alert enough to take aspirin if there had, do you recall that they even had it when he was that?
Oh, yeah. They had the aspirin.
He did have it.
But I don't know, he was up, like I tell them, a little something long a time ago didn't hurt me too bad, but now you see, I've got to the top going down, and I ain't got much to fight it with. You read me there.
They say too, your dad, if you were a little boy, he probably wasn't, he wasn't that old when he got this.
No, he was, when he had that.
Right. It's my understanding that it did affect younger, healthy individuals.
Yes, ma'am, it did.
In their 30s and healthy people.
Yes. Well, when they got up that shot, for that, it's taken down. Well, it's just gradually went out, Very seldom you ever hear of anybody that's temperature going that high now. But that temperature goes high enough, it'll knock you out pretty good,
Right.
pretty late. And that's what was happening to a lot of folks. Folks that took it, and then 12 hours was dead.
Do you remember if schools and businesses and even churches were closed during this time when people were so ill?
The school, folks like we was, did go to school, but there weren't nowhere to go. I was 7 years old when I started school. And went to a newbie school down here, and then went to, they would get up some other school, where I'd walk 3 and 4 miles to go to school. And a lot of times they'd take the rest of the crowd that went with me, they'd take them out of school to work the field and things like that. And my mama, I was so small, I guess, that she'd send me on, and I'd have to go by myself. Go through the woods, the branch, and everything else, and go and come in the morning and come back out every afternoon. And there was a lady from Brantley taught school. Her name was Myrtle Beasley, and red-headed and very strict. And she'd have stayed in the jailhouse if they'd done them like they do them now, because she stayed on him with a pole. Well, she had to. She had so many in the class,
Were people able to get supplies that they needed?
Well, people that didn't have it didn't want to get in contact with it. That's where my daddy got it, I think. The best I can unravel it. But at the close of World War II in 1918, he went over. A lot of them, they went on wagons. But they had it, I was reading a little bit something pertaining to this and advertised, but he went through a train. They called it the war train, and he said there was a guy down sick, and he stopped and talked with him a little. And that's where he said he got his. That man had that influenza lying there.
He thinks he caught it?
He was very contagious. And he was as contagious as his red measles used to be. You could walk through a house just about it and get them things. And mumps was very contagious too.
Do you remember people wearing any kind of mask or anything on their faces or handkerchiefs? Or?
Well, I don't think they know that. That's me in my opinion. They didn't know that.
Do you remember if the church services?
Oh yeah, we went to church.
They didn't ever stop that during this.
Yes, and they stopped. Well, they stopped it for a period of time till it settled down, and then went back. Yes, even the school was shut down. You know what schools were, because schools were very crude. You know, but you know you could learn some if you take an interest to go.
people just sort of, you think they just figured out on their own that they needed to not gather together?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They know it well. There was some and he put out the word, you know, to that it was dangerous to being around people that with that high fever. Now you'd have been very easy caught when he was at his highest temperature, and see, that was a virus, and he'd settle. It's like this pollen that's in the air now. It'll settle on you somewhere, and that's the roughest stuff I ever jumped again. It'll get me down.
Right, right.
And
go ahead.
The big part about it, doctors don't know what to do for it now. Well, I don't think they've got out anything to do for it yet. I think this shot, this shot that they're giving now, you know, I think that's to avoid it, if you get exposed. You know, I think that's what it is. And I have missed some of those shots, but I've taken quite a bit of them too. And you know how it is. They go to places and give them shots. The health department, and there's private doctors that gives them and thing and another. But that's the only time that's a thing like that has ever come through. Now, we'd missed school a lot of times. Our whole family had never had measles. And me and my brother got it out of school, out of Brantley. And we everyone had that at one time.
If this were to happen now, in this day and time, how do you think people would do?
Well, they pulled together and helped one another. And the doctors is more advanced today than they was then. They got more to do with. We go through it a lot better than we went through 1918. That was awful.
I think some of the suggestions that you made and about what people did as far as staying at home and avoiding others, would you recommend if that's what would need to happen again, if something like this occurred?
Mm-hmm. That's sort of a tough one. But I don't think so. I think if you got your shots and it's up to date, that you could go ahead and help him and not expose yourself too bad.
Right.
I think it's a good thing that you wouldn't have to. I think it'd be a lot better than this for it to come now than it did then. It was so crude then, you know, people and lived at home and no doctor. The doctors weren't advanced, but they're advanced now on it. And we're getting a lot more doctors now than we had back then.
Really?
There was an old doctor who was never married, that Dr. Watkins I was speaking about in Glenwood. And you could hurt yourself, you know, cut yourself or something and go over there. And it was so crude then. He'd get his needle and thread and sew you up and not never give you a pain pill or nothing.
That's, you know, talking about the doctors, if there were a severe flu pandemic like that, you know, the doctors may not be available to come see about anybody. And that's one thing we're trying to let people know about, being prepared at home. You know, y'all were talking about y'all nearly ran out of food.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that would be an area where people could maybe...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they'd be it'd be just an easy ride, something like that to what it was. There was no transportation. Maybe mule and wagon, very slow. Take you a day and a half to night to go to Troy and back that way, and things like that. And of course, a person could be dead and ready to bury it. You know? I wondered about how these forefathers come in here and put down him with nothing and just lived. Of course, I reckon they might have had a milk cow or might have had a mule and wagon, a ox and a wagon, or something like that is what I think it'd be.
I think one of the ideas is to just have some things at your house. Keep some supplies there if you can. You know.
Well, you know, most folks don't try to have a garden. But I tell you, I say it's better to have it and not need it than it is to need it and not have it.
That's very
Me
good.
and her got 3 deep freeze, and we've got them practically full. And we give the young ones, you know, share it, one thing or another. But it was awful time back there. It was awful time back there.
You've given us some really information, and I know that this will be beneficial for the public.
In our day to come, probably.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I tell you what, if there's anything I like to do, is to help somebody. And there was nobody to help, well to know nothing them that could. You know, they was ignorant. No, well, just didn't know, we'll say that. And done the best they could.
Well, you certainly have helped, because people, unless they've lived something, they don't have really a grasp on the seriousness of it and how bad that was, what y'all went through.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's extremely important information.
It'd be hard to find somebody that was grown now, that went through that. And I'm lucky to can remember, as young age as I was going on, I'd say close to 4.5 years old. But I can remember it real good. And then, but some folks can remember, but now I'm getting where that I can go to the barn or something, and I don't know what I'm going to eat or when I get there.
I'll do that.
It'll happen.
Do you remember being scared at that age? I'm sure at 4.5 years old you were probably very frightened, and were you?
Well, you know, at times I was. But I could hold it down, you know. I can handle it pretty good, I'll say.
Do you remember if people actually did stay at home, or did they try to get out and about? What were their feelings about this? Were they afraid to be out and around other people?
Folks might just stayed at home. They didn't want to get it, you see. They stayed put. If they didn't have it, they didn't want it. And you can't blame them. They were doing the best they could. I know my dad's sister and his brother was living right out from us, you know, a mile, half a mile or something like that. And they'd come to the edge of the porch maybe, you know, and ask about it, but they were scared to come in. Well, in a way, they were saving their hide, I guess, and doing the best they knew. But they was whole families, and large families that died with that.
The entire family?
Entire family. Knock them all out. But I reckon some folks had more fighting ability about them, you know, to fight it off with, or just was to be, I guess. If they won't, I don't believe that there'll come a thing like that back here no more. It'll be something else that somebody's going to figure out. Something like that bombing in New York and one thing and another to get to people. This come from Europe. That flu epidemic come from Europe. And they brought it back with them and scattered it over here, and it went wild when it got here. And it'll be something that'll come back. But there's a lot of smart people out there now. Or they was down then. They just didn't know, hardly know what to do. Just look to the Lord, I guess.
Well, I think you've summed it up quite well. I hope it doesn't happen again.
Well, I don't believe it will. That's me and my personal opinion. Now, it could, but I don't think it. I don't think it. It's seldom you ever see one of them. See, that's been a long time since that's happened. Well, there's been folks that's had that, I reckon, a little touch of flu, but not the real flu. That weren't no real flu that I had. But I reckon that aspirin tablet cooled that temperature, yes, and my body gained it back overnight, a portion of it, to where I could get up and sit on the bed. You know, I couldn't have got up to save my life then.
It'll knock you down. That's
yeah.
it.
I was, Mama had to change the bed because I'd sweated so much with that fever. Well, I reckon giving that aspirin tablet done it. And she'd had to change the bedclothes about twice a night, or did that night. The next night, my fever was down. Some chopped it off somewhere right there.
I imagine it was the same way with your dad when he had that.
And I don't know whether the doctors know to give that aspirin or not. I can't say about that. You younger folks just can't imagine how crude it was out here with the doctors and the people back in them days. Sure can.